everyone, I'm Dr. Brill-Morgan, and I'm here today to chat with you actually about food intolerances. So a lot of my patients come in and, a lot of them actually have already been diagnosed with different food intolerances. They know that they have a hard time with certain foods. There's certain, obviously, foods that tend to be harder for people to digest, like gluten, dairy, sugar, sometimes corn, eggs. The list goes on and on. So I do have this kind of predicament with patients, and I hear it all the time, that when someone comes in and they're like, I honestly don't know what to eat. Like, I've been told, I've done maybe a food intolerance test, and I've had maybe like 25, 40 foods, that I can't eat on there, and I've cut those out, but I continue to just have this growing list of food intolerances or foods that I just can't digest well or I have a hard time with. Okay, so if that resonates with you, definitely listen to this because this is really important. And I have this conversation with patients all of the time, especially when they're at that place where they're like, I keep cutting things out of my diet, but like I literally don't know what else to do. There's only so many foods I can cut out. And then food actually becomes quite a chore, right? It becomes more of a worry, more of an anxiety than something that is good, something that we want to enjoy, right? Food is there to give us energy, to provide our cells with, the things that we need for energy. But it's also enjoyable. It should be pleasurable. You should enjoy eating, okay? There's a lot of, cultural stuff around eating. There's a lot of social stuff around eating. So that should be really something that you enjoy. And if you're not enjoying eating and you're finding it really stressful, there's a lot of anxiety around eating, preparing food, even going to the grocery store and, figuring out what to eat, or what to buy, then that's something that we need to address because that shouldn't be the case, okay? Sometimes that's the case, short term. So with patients, I will change diet, okay? So all the patients that are listening being like, hey, wait a second. I do change diet, but usually it's for a shorter amount of time. So usually we're looking at 30 days of dietary changes, and that's usually just to decrease inflammation, to make some changes in terms of the gut, make some changes in terms of hormones, but we're really not looking at, long-term dietary changes unless there are a few cases where we're doing that, okay? But usually when we're looking at some kind of diet or some kind of food restriction, it's only for 30 days, maybe 60 days, but really that's the max that we're looking at for the most part in most situations, okay? So if you're on a diet where you've been restricting food for a really long time and you're really not noticing, a change, or when you add those foods back in, you're having a really hard time, that's not the point, okay? So the point of dietary changes is to actually decrease inflammation, decrease that response, heal the gut, so that when we add that back in, it isn't so reactive, okay? So my goal with patients is really to get them to a point where, in 99% of the cases that if they go to a birthday party, once every few months or that sort of thing, that they can have a piece of cake, that it's not the end of the world. Our baseline is good, but we're having these things and we're going to enjoy ourselves and we don't have to worry about it so much. Okay? So coming back to the multiple sensitivities, if you are someone that, is having all of these food sensitivities, you keep adding more and more foods to your list of things that you cannot tolerate. This is most likely more of a gut issue than a food issue, okay? So this is what I tell all my patients. It's not the food that's the issue, necessarily, okay? It's the actual what's happening within your body and what your body is doing to that food that's the issue, okay? So I want you to take that kind of thought out of your brain saying, okay, yes, this food is bad for me. Because it really doesn't matter. The food, the food's not in there like, ha, 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 ha. It's not an evil food. It's just the way that our body is reacting to foods, okay? And that this tends to have more of a reaction with more inflammatory foods like dairy or gluten or all of these fun things that are, really trendy. So with that, what actually can be happening is that we actually have either a dysbiosis within our system or, there's other things going on within the gut, okay? So there's this term leaky gut. It's not my favorite, right? It's really alternative medicine based, and I don't love it. But really the idea of leaky gut is something called intestinal permeability, right? So when we have issues with our intestinal permeability, which we're going to go through, so if we have our intestines, okay, we have a wall, all the food's going to come through. So there are cells within our intestines that should be like this, okay? They're a really tiny, tiny spot in between that allows, everything that's broken down to be able to come through. So proteins are going to be broken down into amino acids. We're going to have vitamins. We're going to have, fatty acids. We're going to have glucose that comes through. It's really, we want to get our food to that point. So it's as broken down as it can be, and then it's going to come through, and it's going to be allowed to go through these little spots, okay? What happens over time, so whether it's, different food issues, so let's say you're lactose intolerant and you're having a lot of lactose, alcohol, smoking, environmental factors, right? Stress is a huge one as well. So over time when that happens, which it happens to most of us, right? There's lots of stress, there's lots of stuff going on, especially right now, is what happens is these actually can grow a little bit. So there's little actually fibers that hold them together, and those fibers get a little bit more weak. The bacteria that's kind of holding those, hanging out there, having mucus form over top of it, kind of weakens as well, and they tend to pull away from each other. Okay, so what happens then is these holes are bigger, and when the holes are bigger, you can actually get bigger size particles going through. Okay, so instead of like the really broken down pieces of vitamins or, the smallest pieces of, amino acids or that sort of thing that's going through, we tend to get bigger pieces, and we can get big proteins going through. We can have, other like bigger sugars and that sort of thing going through. And what happens when that goes through is we actually go through, and that will go into the bloodstream, right? Because we need those vitamins, we need those things to be transported around the body to do what we need to do. That's the whole point of us eating. But what happens is when those bigger particles actually go through, is that it goes into the bloodstream, and the bloodstream, the body, we have an immune system, and the immune system sees that as an issue. It sees it as an intruder, because it shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be in the bloodstream. We shouldn't have these really big particles in the bloodstream. And so we create an immune response. We attack it because we think it's a foreign invader. Okay? So that's not great, right? But the first time, okay, whatever, you might feel a little bit up, like a little tired or that sort of thing, but it's not going to make a huge difference. The issue is, and what's really good about our immune system is it has memory, right? So if we, get something one time, then we actually create an immune response to that, and we have a memory, so we can fight it off way quicker the next time. The issue with food intolerances and the issue with this kind of increased intestinal permeability is that when that protein then, or whatever goes through again, right, the same thing goes through again, and it's in the bloodstream, our immune system is on it like that, okay? And every single time that we're exposed to it, we increase the effectiveness of our immune system being able to attack it. The issue is it's not a foreign invader. It's not going to do anything. It just shouldn't be there, right? And so our immune system is actually working the way it should, but that should just not be there because we should have these tight junctions. So what happens is we tend to get a lot of, inflammation. We get a lot of an immune response. So that's going to create a lot of inflammation. It can create fatigue. It can create pain in different areas. It can create a lot of bloating or, all of these things. Okay, so that's actually what happens. Over time, obviously, these little things are big. It doesn't selectively pick what's going through. Okay, so what you're eating, is just going to you're going to eventually create an immune response to a lot of things, right? And the more and more that we're having, the more and more time we have that things are going through, we're just creating more and more immune responses to different foods. So that's actually what happens in terms of why we get these crazy amounts of, food intolerances or foods that we have an issue with, is because that's actually happening. So the longer you leave it, the more that you just pull those foods out, the foods that you're eating are going to continue to, create an immune response, have the same issue. So that's why a lot of the time, when people do come in with a food intolerance test, for example, Like, it's not necessarily the foods that are the issue, right? And taking those foods out for the time being is really important because we need to bring down inflammation. We need to actually heal these so that they can stay together, right? We don't want them here. We want them to come back. And so what we need to do in that case, and if you're someone that does have a lot of food intolerances, is that, sometimes we do need to limit diet for a short period of time, but we do that for literally this whole reason of healing these. Okay, so you need to make sure that you're doing some kind of healing protocol and changing up bacteria or dysbiosis if that's there as well to allow for the healing, okay? Because then we're actually able to add those foods back in and you don't have as much of a reaction or a reaction at all. Okay, so if you're someone that has multiple food intolerances, or someone that has multiple food intolerances and their list keeps growing, they don't know what to do, they don't know, what to eat, this is something that they need to know, and this is something that, is more of the root. It's actually what causes the food intolerances, okay? Taking out those foods, you can feel good, but putting them back in, you're going to have the same issue, and you're going to continue to create more food intolerances, which is not fun, okay? So that's my little bit for today. Have a lovely day, and I'll talk to you guys soon.